So it's over to you, Christine.
All right. Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for making time in your day to come to this presentation. So my name's Christine Robson. I've been in education for a quarter of a century now. The vast majority of that has been as a literacy coordinator. I've recently taken up a headship in Sunderland, and that's where I'm presenting from now. So Townend Academy in Sunderland is where I'm presenting from. My journey with Launchpad began about 5 years ago at my previous school in Bexhill, which is also a school in Sunderland, and I was in charge of teaching and learning, and so I came across Launchpad as the school that I was working in very much needed the input on those pre-literacy skills in the early years. Okay, so the title of our presentation today is called Mind the Phonics Gap, Identifying and Tackling Barriers, Phonic Progression in Key Stage 1. All right, so we'll start off. Oh, next, please. Thank you, Andrew. We have been experiencing some technical difficulties, but I'm sure we'll get those sorted in a moment. So just while we're waiting for the slides to catch up with us. Right. So the aims for today for this session is to accurately diagnose barriers to acquiring phonics, and then to plan and deliver targeted support. And what I should have put there as well is how this can then influence quality first teaching as well as just interventions. So they are the aims for the session. Next, please. Okay, so a little bit more about my context. So when I first came across Launchpad, I was working in a school with 46% pupil premium children, with a GLD of just 50%, and this was pre-COVID, so that 50% really was a bit of an issue for us. We didn't have the COVID reasons and rationale for why children wouldn't reach GLD. So there were only 50% of the cohort that were in line. And also the teaching was graded as outstanding in the EYFS. So that kind of takes out some of the reasons for why our GLD was so low. It wasn't down to teaching. We also could people turn their microphones off, please? Is that okay? Thank you. So we also had a rigorous phonics scheme that had been well embedded, and it had been running for the previous 3 years. So again, that wasn't impacting the GLD. We only had a prediction of 50% to achieve the phonics screening score in year 1, which you'll be aware is certainly not something that any school would want to have. And we also, this particular cohort was a high needs in terms of SEND. In fact, we even had a nurture provision for the number and severity of some of those needs. We had Launchpad operating in our early years, so we'd already begun to roll it out with our nursery and reception children. But as they entered year 1, we needed to look for potential solutions to improving the age-related expectations of this year group, with particular focus on their phonics acquisition. Next, please, Andrew. Thank you. So if I take a case study of a particular child, despite rigorous phonics teaching that had been monitored and delivered within an inch of its life, X child was unable to retain that phonic knowledge and certainly unable to apply it in terms of blending the sounds together. So that was what we were faced with 50% of the children in a cohort, which on this particular occasion was 22 children. Okay, next, please. So the potential barriers with having a background of the different elements of Launchpad, we as a group of professionals got together and unpicked what we felt some of the issues might be. And if you look at the Launchpad as a whole, we narrowed it down to 2 particular strands. There was this one, which is the auditory strand, and you can see that it progressively moves up in terms of expectations from the bottom of the screen to the top. In line 1, which is auditory discrimination. So if we unpick that just a little bit, you can see what auditory discrimination looks like in terms of some of those. So for example, at the very beginning, it's copy 2 instruments from a choice of 6. It moves up to finding an object or a picture to match in an environmental sound. And then it moves further up again into discriminating initial phonemes within a word. So that's what we class as auditory discrimination. The second strand is auditory memory, and you can see some examples from there. Further up result in being able to hold a sentence. Lower down, it's being able to repeat a phoneme or 2 phonemes. And then the auditory sequential memory, which is the third strand, starts way down with following instruction at just a simple 3-word level, and then moving all the way up to hold 5, 6, 7 words in the auditory memory in order. So we focused in on that as being one strand, the auditory issues. Next, please. And then the other issue that the teachers and the professionals felt was an issue for this cohort of children was the visual side. And so again, similar to auditory, that falls into the visual memory, what children could retain as a picture or an image, and then the visual sequential memory, which is holding that visual pattern, but in the correct sequence. So we felt that those were some issues that we were experiencing with this particular cohort of children. So then came the decision about how to diagnose this even further and in greater detail. Next, please. So Kirsty and I worked together on using this diagnostic tool. So I'll explain what the tool is. So you'll see across the top, it's broken into visual and auditory memory. And then very technical, it uses some coloured pens. So you've got a selection of 6 to 7 coloured pens, and you'll see me carrying out this diagnostic in a moment, but I'll just talk through the format. So you have some pens. We're looking at whether the children can hold the image of those pens without any verbal instructions. So just holding the verbal blue, yellow, green, for example, and then picking out the correct colours. A little note to yourself is always check that the children know their colours first, otherwise the test won't prove anything other than they need to learn their colours. And then you move on to, can the children sequence them? So if you pull out the red pen, the blue pen, the purple pen, can they then imitate the red pen, the blue pen, the purple pen in the sequence? You can then move that on to letter patterns, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. And then the other side that we knew was an issue for this cohort was the auditory memory strand. And again, this time, instead of holding up the colours, you would name them. So they're testing their auditory skills. And the first time that you would do that test, you would just say blue, yellow, pink. And if the children could gather them in any order, then it shows that they've got auditory memory. But then if you're wanting to see whether they've got auditory sequential memory, you'd expect them to get them in the order that you said them. And then you'll see there's another column at the end, which is to do with oral blending. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so this is a little video. It is not at all professional. It is with an iPad with a member of staff directing it at me and the child. So it's rustic. That's the way to look at it. So I think we'll just dive straight into it, and then I'll talk you through it once we've watched it. So this is diagnostic assessment using the Launchpad as a basis to find out what needs to be developed further. Oh,
that's my issue. We can,
right, well, don't worry. I can talk through what the video would have shown if you like.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So smooth wall, it's responsible for everything, isn't it? So basically, what you would have seen there was an interesting example, and it never ceases to amaze me that the differences between the children and the different issues that different children have. So I would be issuing the instructions. For example, I would start off with the visual, whereby I would hold up different coloured pens from a selection in front of the child, and without any instruction, have the child pick up the same ones and then put them down. All the time, I'm assessing them as to whether they can do it with 2 pens, If they can, I'd then go on to do it with 3 pens. If they can do it with 3, I'd go on to 4. And then at any point where a child made an error, I'd repeat the same task with the same number of pens just to see if it was a lack in concentration as opposed to a gap that needed plugging with that skill. Once I'd reassured myself that I'd reached where that child was in terms of one skill, for example, visual memory, I'd then give instructions as to, okay, so this time, and I use a phoneme frame as like a grid, and then I pick up a pen with a certain colour and I place it in a position on the grid from left to right as you would read, and then I'd pick a different one and a different one, and depending upon what you found out from the visual memory, you might think, well, I'll go in at three different pens, and then if at the 3 pen stage the child gets the sequencing wrong, you might repeat 3 again, or you might go down to 2. So what you're doing the whole time is just trying to find where that particular child's level of skill is, and you're making notes just so that you know for yourself. Once you've assessed the visual by using that method, it's exactly the same test. And what I love about it is it doesn't cost any money, and it's really quite quick as well. So the whole assessment takes no more than 7 minutes. So then if you're assessing the auditory, you have the same resources. This time you would just say, can you get me the blue, green, purple? And again, if the child manages it, but they don't do it in the right order, that's fine, because you're not assessing sequencing. You're just assessing whether they can hold that auditory information. Then you'd go up to 4, to 5, etc. To 6 is where I tend to stop, because personally I can't go past 6. So then once you've got those, you would then repeat that, but this time explain to the child clearly and model it, so that you want to make sure that the child is understanding what it is you're asking of them. So I always model the activity, and then this time it would be, so this time if I said purple, blue, green, and you positioned them, you want the purple out first, the blue out second, the green out last, and all ages of children can complete this task at different skill levels. Once you've reached the limit for that child, that's your assessment done. You might want to add in the oral blending at the end, because children tend to present with a mixture of issues. So however you do it in your school, if you're a read, write, ink school, you might Fred talk them a word. If you're not a read, write, ink school, you can make up your own explanation and say you're doing it like a robot. You would give them a 3-letter word and ask them if they model it first. So if you were saying act, and then you would say, oh, so my robot is saying bat. And then you'd give them a 3, a 4, a 5, etc., to see if one of their issues was inability to orally blend. So that's the diagnostic stage. And once you've worked your way through the diagnostic stage, you've then got a profile around that child's specific weaknesses. I've never yet carried out a diagnostic on a child who failed their phonics screening score, who was excellent at these things. And I've assessed a lot of children. So I've just done it in this school that I'm at now. And I had the teacher and the teaching assistant from the year 1 class watching, and they were just amazed at, oh my goodness, there we are throwing our graphemes at the children for them to be able to, you know, hold it in their head visually, to be able to hear it with their auditory skills, to be able to blend it, when actually a lot of these children are struggling at just holding 3 separate visual, very easy to see pens, as opposed to the more abstract letter patterns. And so anyway, I'll talk more about what you do in the next slide. So we've got our diagnostics. We know that our children have some issues with visual, auditory and blending. So then it's about pulling that together. Next, please.
And we can share these, the links to videos afterwards, just so you can have a look.
Okay. All right. Okay, so generally the findings, if I go back to 2019, but I have replicated all of these assessments in individual year groups, not just in year 1. Obviously, year 1 is a crucial year. If they leave EYFS without GLD, and you're looking at ensuring that year 1 is the year for phonics, if they have any of these gaps, then obviously they need plugging as early as possible. But I've used it with children right up through Key Stage 2, particularly with SEND children who just seem to be stuck and not moving past their targets. this really does create, gives a greater picture about the child's issues and helps you diagnose them and then teach them. So the findings for this cohort that I had in 2019 were that the majority of children had visual memory issues, and that in particular, the visual sequential was poorer than the visual memory. But then that's to be expected. It's much harder to hold an image in the right order than it is just to randomly hold the images. So the sequential memory, as far as I've never had a child that's better at sequential visual than just at visual. It is like the next progressive step. And also we had a significant number that had auditory sequential issues, but not as many as the visual. And sometimes children have both. You tend to find that, you know, the poorer learners do have both as an issue. And then I found that 10% of the cohort struggled to orally blend alongside having these other issues. So that was my overview of this cohort of children in 2019. Okay. So what were the actions? So we devised a bespoke intervention pitched towards the children's specific needs, and you can obviously group them, and everybody's looking for quick fixes. So rather than having intervention on a one-to-one level that takes up so much of your valuable teacher time, that actually I found that a group of 6 children work really well together, and you group them according to whether they are visual memory issues, auditory memory issues, a mixture of both. You tend to pitch it so that the children are with children with similar issues. Then once we'd devised our bespoke intervention, back again, please, thank you. Once we'd thought about the intervention that we were going to run, and I'll come on to that on the next slide, we also thought that this shouldn't just be an external from the classroom, an add-on, that actually if these were the children's issues, that it needed weaving through the whole provision. So we looked at ways that these strategies could be employed and used within the generic teaching, the whole class teaching. The staff needed to be trained and understand as well what it is that we're doing for the children. So to unpick the Launchpad, to have time to digest what auditory and visual means, to actually see the children experiencing or be part of the diagnostic process. I often think that if the person that's going to be running the intervention sees the children do the diagnostics, it gives them a much deeper understanding of the issues that the children have. And then importantly, once you've done anything that you're hoping to have an impact on, the important thing is to put rigor around how you assess and how you make sure that it is having an impact. So this, you know, something that I have found over time is it does have a rapid actual impact. So within days, you'll see children moving from being able to hold 3 visual items to 4, to being able to sequence 4 sounds instead of 3. So you really do see that the impact happens quite quickly. I also make a point of explaining to the children exactly what skill it is that they're developing, so that they don't just think they're playing a game. They can see the link between, and I use the correct vocab as well. So we talk about visual, and we talk about auditory, and we talk about how that links to holding patterns of letters, and how that links to them being a reader or them being a writer, so that they know exactly what support they're having and how it's going to impact them, and they talk about it, and they share it with their parents, which is really important. So the monitoring part, I've found that once the staff have been trained, initially you have to have a lot of rigor around. We'd meet weekly, we'd talk about how the children were performing, which children were making advanced progress, which children were making progress but not as much as others. And we had fluidity of groupings, so that as soon as a child moved their ability from say visual and they needed more auditory, we didn't keep doing the same thing. If they didn't need it, we moved them on to the next step. And that was vital in securing their progress, because remember, they're having a catch up. But once the staff are trained to a certain point, you find that you don't need to drive it forward so much as they would say, oh, I've noticed this week that X, Y, or Z is ready to move on to so-and-so. And that's what you want. You want that independence of the staff leading it and saying, I think they're ready to move on to this now. Are you okay if I do this? And so it's just for their kind of reassurance, really, that they are doing the right thing when they're moving children on or spotting and assessing new children as they join the cohort. And then I've mentioned there that you keep on adapting. So once you found out new information, you'd adapt what you were doing in terms of your class teaching and also the rapid change in what they need from the interventions. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I'm talking about the interventions and your teaching, so you can see how this could be a task within a classroom.
I searched all of my things and I couldn't find it, but I knew
as well as outside. Interesting to hear people multitasking, that's a skill.
Thank you.
So if you can see here on the screen, you'll see that from the top down to the bottom is the progression in terms of how you would move children through the visual and auditory. So it's a bit like concrete, pictorial and abstract in maths. So you'd start off with the concrete, and you can see there that these little objects are amazing for this task. So you might have seen them in your school, the little rubber based objects. This one's all to do with transport, but there's others on animals and things. And so you just have to use what you've got around. And another thing about all of this intervention is you're not buying into a scheme, you're creating it with things that you've got within your own environment. It's very little input in terms of cost, which we all appreciate. So you start off with any of your interventions or quality first teaching, working with the younger children and the more severe needs, using your practical objects that they can touch and feel. So you'd start off with that. You'd then move on to pictorial, and you can see there that the pictorial version here, you can differentiate your pictorial. So if you were doing animals, and you might have, and you can see there, there's an example of a fish, there's a frog, there's a spider. They're very visually different. So, but as soon as you start to throw in mammals, for example, and you start to go to four-legged mammals, you can see there that that is a step in itself. So you might move on to very different looking animals first, but then start to do four-legged, and you'll find that the children with weaker visual skills find it harder to differentiate between a cow and a sheep than they do between a cow and a fish. Obviously, the visual is very different between those two. And then there's some examples here of the types of things that we would do with that within an intervention. And unfortunately, the video won't work today, so I will explain what the intervention is. So for example, if this was where the child was at, you can see that there's a bingo board. Each child would get a bingo board, and there'd be a selection of these images on the table in front of the group of children. You, as the facilitator, would then have one of these images that you would flash up to the children. And this again is for differentiation purposes. You might hold the card up for 3 seconds. You might start off by holding it for 5 seconds. You might decide that one child is slightly ahead of another and let one child say, right, you go and find it, and hold the card longer for another child. And you'll see the child really focusing on the image. And then when you turn it away, they've then got to locate that exact same image and then bring it back to their bingo board. So it's how often you show it, and it's for how long you show it, and also distance as well. So you could be further away, which strengthens the visual muscles further. If the shorter time that you show it, again, is developing that visual skill. And then the same activity, if you're looking at visual sequential, would be that you'd hold 2 images up and see if they can get them in the right order. If I've got my phoneme frame like this, I might, and this was the activity that's on the video, I would select from 3 of the images, put them on, not let them see me doing it, turn it around and show it to them, cover it after a certain amount of seconds, and watch them working. And this is where you really see the progress developing. You can see the concentration on the children's faces. You can see that they might pick the 3, but then they're trying to remember. And that, if you're talking about remembering more, this is exactly what this is about, them being able to visualize where it was that they saw that image. And obviously you can see as we move further down, you can go to more that you're asking them to hold. And then you'll see that the next step, and this is where the phonics really begins to have an impact. So all the way up until here, you've been developing just the visual or the auditory. But by the time you get to here, you're actually linking it in with the phonic stage that the child is at. I've gone straight in here with a common 3 issue. And obviously you can see yourself, a visual learner here is going to have trouble because they all have the same letter at the end. And so they've got to really discriminate with the S and the C and the T for those letter patterns. But prior to that, if you were working on SAT-PIN, for example, you would just go to some of those letters just to consolidate where they're up to with their phonics program. And so then the natural extension from when you've worked with letter patterns is to then apply the letter pattern that you've been working on, but put it into words, because obviously the more letters there are, the harder it is to visually discriminate between them. And this is where you really start to see the payback in terms of the children accelerating their knowledge of phonics, the children's reading making progression, and importantly, obviously the phonics screening score developing, because that's something that you would assess routinely after you've carried this intervention out. So the next screen would have been a little video of some children taking part in this activity. So I'll just describe it a little bit. 3 children who've just recently failed their phonics screening score, with a range of scores between 20 and 25. Obviously, we all know that the pass was a 32. So these children had significant issues still. And so this program has been running for about 4 or 5 days by the time I'd taken this video, and the children completely understood what they were doing and why they were doing it. They understood about their visual memory. They understood that it would impact on their reading. And they were working on, what I did was I analysed their phonics screening score results. And if I remember rightly, it was the digraphs of AY and then AR and AI, I think it was. So I had lots of those letter patterns out on the table. I would then hold one up, put it down, and then they would collect it. If it was auditory I was working on, I would say the sound as opposed to just showing it. That's something as a teacher you've got to get used to. If it's visual that you're working on, you've got to zip your lips and try just to keep really quiet, because you don't want to have cognitive overload. You just want them working their visual. And similarly, if it's auditory, you keep your hands behind your back and don't start pointing at what it is that you're wanting them to get to. So you've got to sit on your hands or zip your lips, depending upon which strategy you're using at the time. And the children absolutely love doing it. They then want to challenge themselves. Can we do more? Can I go on to 4? And on this particular clip, it shows that one child is more secure than the others. And I think in the clip, I demonstrate how I show the other 2 children the sequence for longer and ask the child that's developed a bit quicker for her to start the task quicker while I'm holding up the visual for the others. And you can see them studying it really hard, and they're in year 1 and they know what they've got to do. Next, please. Okay, so the logistics. I have found that the more frequently you do it, short bursts are way more beneficial than, not your literacy hour spent doing this, but little and often, and try not to interrupt the flow of it. So that if you are building it up, don't pull it at any opportunity. Keep this going, prioritize it before other things. So it comes ahead of rehearsal for a play. You still need to do this. It comes ahead of, we've got a few staff absences. Don't automatically pull this, because this is going to make the biggest difference. So your daily intervention, short and sharp and focused. The concepts and the skills reinforced in the lessons. So the application of, okay, so if they've gone out and the teacher knows that they're working on that, what could you do in the classroom that would strengthen those visual skills, strengthen those auditory skills, and make sure that you're doing that right across your teaching. So in history, if it's visual skills that you're looking at, then, on your timeline, if you're doing kings and queens, make it a visual based activity, because that reinforces the skill that they need to plug. Parent sharing events, this will come as news to parents that you know, this is a way of tackling reading that they won't be quite used to. So bring them in, let the children share with the parents what they do, how they do, send the resources home, and try to catch the children as young as possible. So explain this game of hide and seek, have them on the fridge door where, you know, you can, you know, we've laminated and given blue tack out, and then we've asked the parents to do similar activities to the interventions I've just shown you, but doing them at home with real life objects. So when you go shopping, for example, it's an auditory skill. Say when you're unpacking the shopping, okay, can you put the beans and the soup and the tomatoes away, please? And so that if you're telling the parents how to apply it at home, you're doing it in the lesson and in intervention, you will soon find that the whole thing becomes very cohesive and the children start to develop rapidly. It's monitored and it's adapted as the children develop. Thank you. So what next? I found that we were achieving what we aimed to achieve, which was word level, and the children were able to blend, you know, moving towards that magic 32 phonics screening score pass mark. But then teachers were saying, well, but they can't hold a sentence now. And if you think about it, holding a sentence is just the next progressive step from being able to hold a word, hold a letter pattern. It then, you know, this weakness is not going to be plugged and fixed forever. You need to think about what the next step would be for that child. So we can talk through what activities we came up to support this in class. So, for example, I created the game for auditory skill called snap or trap. So you would say a sentence slowly, then you would repeat the sentence, but you might alter one of the words. And so for example, the cat sat on the mat, and all the children would be listening. The cat had a hat. So you're hoping that the children would then, and you can do anything you like. You can get them to hit the table. You can have like trash or treasure, going back a little while. Snap or trap. Snap if the sentence was exactly the same. Trap if you changed one word or more than one word. So you're focusing on them being able to listen to a sentence, hold all of the words in that sentence, and then obviously you can differentiate it by maybe even swapping two words around. So hat, cat, cat, hat, for example. And so you can become as complex as you want it to, again, bearing in mind the developmental stage of the child. So auditory snap or trap is a good one for holding a sentence. Next word, bingo, would be a step down from that. So you'd rehearse a sentence, and then you would say the sentence, you'd get the children to say the sentence, and then you would stop at a word, and the children would have all of the different words out in front of them, and they would point to the word that you've stopped at, so that they're holding so much of the sentence and then having to locate the one that was missing. And then some visual ideas for sentence level work is show them, like I've got word there, but we're developing a bit. So it might be a phrase, it would then extend to a sentence. You would hold it up, again, remembering that if it's a visual, no speaking at all, you'd just hold it up, allow the children to study the sentence, put the sentence down. They would have a selection of sentences in front of them that either they would just grab and show you, or if it was a bingo board type activity, they would circle it. You'd hold it back up. And then a crucial part of all these interventions is you don't do the assessment, the children do the assessment. So instead of you talking all over the activity and saying, oh, can you see where you've circled this, but it should have been that, you just hold them up and get them to look at each word and train them, again, with no talking, just to look along. If you do need to scaffold, just point to the part in the sentence that you think that they're struggling with, as opposed to talking over the top. So that would be the Match Me Bingo. Find Me. Each child has their own phrase or sentence, or a selection of phrases, sentences dotted around the room, spread out on a table. You would hold up a phrase or a sentence, and this is very good in the olden days where you used to do a bit of kinesthetic to get them up and moving about. So they would go off, and obviously this bit is fun, but it's also strengthening the visual muscles even further, because they're having to move further to go and find all the different sentences that match the one that you've shown. You can have a timer activity for that. They do like that one. Spot the difference, issue a sentence, show another with a difference, children to spot the difference. And then you can differentiate with more than one difference in the sentence, the length of the sentence. You could even move it on to longer than that for those children that are ready for a bit more progression. Thank you.
Decided it doesn't want to move now. It's on a go slow.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking that, impact, that's it, yes. So the impact was that from the 50% prediction at the beginning of the year, we did secure 86%, which was phenomenal for this cohort of children. What I particularly valued the most was the number of the SEND children that made progress. We had eight children with severe needs in the nurture provision, and 3 of them out of the 8 secured a pass at the phonics screening score, which was amazing. It also resulted in them moving out of the nurture provision and moving into mainstream classes, which is a massive impact for those children. But the ones that didn't secure a phonics screening score, it still had a profound impact on those. So, for example, one child, when part of my original assessment was to see whether they knew any letters, they'd been having routine, rigorous phonics for years. This child was actually a year 3 child, but was accessing education at a year 1 level and below. And when first shown letters or graphemes, he made animal noises because he had no awareness at all that a grapheme held a phonic representation. So at first I thought he was just angry with me because he was growling and snarling, and I was thinking, but he actually was just putting any sound to what I was showing him. He went through similar interventions, etc. And although he didn't pass his phonics screening score, he rapidly developed his ability to give the correct phoneme for the graphemes, but he didn't meet the blending side of the target. So although he could say b, he couldn't blend them yet, but the progress that he went through was phenomenal. And then obviously you'll see that the visual and the auditory don't just have an impact on the reading ability, but that as children are moving through school and their ability to hold those letter patterns increases their spelling ability and their phonically decodable writing in year 1, but also their ability to have independence as they move through school. So you'll know the children that, will tell you an amazing sentence or talk through some brilliant ideas. The minute they pick their pen up and they just have that block, that's because the auditory memory has stopped. They can't remember what it is that they've said. So it was having a writing impact in terms of the enjoyment of writing and also the attainment of writing as well. So we're back on it now, post-COVID, and the school that I'm at now, we're just going through the process of just the initial phase of let's diagnose. So any child right through school from year 1 up to year 6 who had any phonic issues is being diagnosed with this first and foremost, and then the provision map of where intervention will be targeted, the training of staff, all of that will begin in the autumn term. But at least for now, we know who needs support, what support they need, and then the other logistics will follow on as the year progresses. And I think that's questions after this. Yes, it is. So if anybody's got any questions that they'd like me to answer or try to answer, I'd be happy to.
Hi, Christine.
Hello.
Hi. Can I just ask about the training of your staff and kind of what that looks like? Is that an ongoing program, or is that just with TA?
Right. So the training, it needs to be very much not theoretically based. So there is a place for let's explain what we're doing and why. So a little bit of background. So a lot of the people that will be trained in this are not necessarily phonics experts, because they might be in any place in the school. And so a little bit of background around what Launchpad is, so the auditory and the visual strands. But Launchpad, as you might know, is covers a wide range of different skills and concepts. Whereas when you're training the staff up, if you narrow your focus to this is what our children need, this is what our children need, and just focus them in on that part, let them take part in the diagnostics, which for me is part of their training, because if they can understand the diagnostics, they kind of understand where the starting point is, and they're really enthused with the progress that the children are making. So you break it down for the staff as well. Then you introduce the interventions or the teaching strategies, and you model them. So instead of just saying off you go, I would do it with them first, or I would do it for them first. Maybe video it, let them watch the video, and then I would let them just go off and experiment with it without me being there. Then I'd come back and dip in and like monitor it with them and alongside them. And that very important structure of early on being very kind of weekly monitoring, weekly learning walks, just to see how it's going. But then as the staff become more proficient, you can take more of a step back and then let them roll it out to other people. Because they then become like, advocates for it. And then
they'll become really empowered as well, the fact that they can then train others.
Yeah, and then they get really annoyed when you do a learning walk and bring other head teachers around the school, and they're thinking, no, people get good at something, you show them off. So so that's how the training kind of rolls out. It's very organic and it works with the individuals, and it then snowballs out.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. Thanks, Christine.
You're welcome. Right, well, if there aren't any other questions, I think you've got a bit of extra time for your lunch.
Yeah, apologies for the videos not working. It's just our security systems, what can you do?
I think as schools, we're used to that, aren't we? Everything you try to do gets smooth walls. So.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Christine. That's brilliant. And thanks for everyone else for joining us. So yes,